Hello and welcome to Property Mastermind Podcast, episode 209. I'm Hilary Saxton, this is Bob Anderson, and today we are talking all things council, working with council, designs, approvals, delays and negotiations. Yes, we're going to unpack the lot. So let's jump on into episode 209. Hello and welcome to episode 209, councils, the good, the bad, the ugly. We've got to be very careful how we go here. But anyway, we're going to unpack the stuff around design, approvals, delays and negotiations. And you're going to learn, as usual, a lot. Before we get started, though, the book. This week, the book goes to Darren McDonald. Darren, book's in the post. You're going to love it. Head straight to page 121. And that's where Bob talks about developing, but you know that because you've been listening to this podcast for long enough, I would say. We have great feedback and we'd love a review. So jump on to either Apple, Spotify or YouTube and write a review. We'd really appreciate it. And it helps more people find us because we do get told that our content's fabulous and why not share it? Okay, so before we get started, as usual, hey, Bob.
Hello, Hilary. How are you today?
I'm good. How's your day going?
My day's been good. Bit relaxed today.
Why's that?
Oh, well, I've been out running around the car a bit, enjoying the sun, getting ready for somebody's birthday.
Woohoo. Guess who that somebody is?
Could be you.
Could be me. So what's your tip for the day then?
Oh, well, I think the tip for today, based on something I did today, is if in doubt about buying a present for somebody, better off if you ask them and get their opinion on something.
Oh, that's wise.
Rather than buy the wrong one, particularly if you're talking about something that could cost a few dollars.
Yep, perfect. Well, that's great. I'm excited for tomorrow.
Me too.
Yes, the big birthday. Love it. I was thinking about it when I was making the bed this morning, actually, about having a birthday and people whinge about feeling older and being older. And it made me just remember a very good friend of mine who passed away at 52. And I thought, you know what? She would love to be having a birthday and being older than she is. So we really need to celebrate our birthdays because the alternative sucks.
Don't talk about the alternative.
Yeah, exactly. It's terrible. Anyway, Bob, we're talking councils, and I know, for you, often it makes all of the hair all over your body stand up straight and go spiky, and you can go all red, and you can get a little bit fired up. But we'll do our best to stay on track with that. And so for anyone who works for a council that's listening, it's not personal. It's just personal experience that is shaping the conversation. In fact, it's reasonably interesting that for those of you who've followed the podcast since the beginning, when Georgia was working for us full time, that's my daughter, and they've just moved back to New Zealand because her partner's a strength and conditioning coach. So he's gone to coach rugby and do what he does. Anyway, she has now got a marketing job because she was doing the marketing here. She's got a marketing job for a district council. And oh my gosh, we've been giving her a bit of flack. She's only been there, is it a week? This is week 2. Yes, this is week 2. But yeah, and she already got a bit uppity and told us, no, it's not like that. No, everyone does work really hard. Yeah, it's been a bit of fun, eh, Bob?
Yeah, well, I've avoided that subject with it. I just thought lead the charge. It's been fun listening on the sidelines.
Going for the wind-up. So if you're a regular listener, thanks for coming back. This episode really is for people that want to learn anything they can about property development. We throw in as many tips and little reminders and things that we can in every episode. So today we are talking all things council, really. And this is one of those topics that can either make or break your timeline. And we've certainly had to deal with some, it makes you want to swear, bull crap, when it comes to councils and timelines. And it's so frustrating when you've got money involved because money costs money and you've always got interest in, there's that sort of thing going on. So that's why it's important to get the right information from the council. But let's go into that, Bob. Let's look at dealing with council. And it's part of every development, and councils can be a challenge. So let's just unpack how the council works when it comes to property development.
Yeah, so councils have what we call a planning scheme, and every council has its own planning scheme, different from another council's planning scheme. And it sets out how development and things beyond development can happen within within a council area. And within that planning scheme, they'll have zonings, which will show, in the residential sector anyway, sort of densities and heights and so forth. So a zoning for a house is going to be different from a zoning where you can do it, a block of apartments, but just even outside of residential, industrial, everything. That's if you were to print it out, it'd be a pretty thick document. In fact, in the old days, that's what we had. Every year we'd go and buy a hard copy, a book. Yeah, here we go.
Oh my gosh,
from the
that's
council.
amazing.
This back, probably 80s, and you'd have the book, and by the end of the year, of course, you've torn pages out and marked stuff, and you go get a new one. And there might be some changes every year. These days, of course, everything's digital.
So in the old, let's go back to when, not the old days, I suppose it probably is, in the paper and pen day, and there will be people listening to this who can't even comprehend that you had to have a hard copy of something. So when there was an update, how did you get notified? They sent you
they just have addendums. You get stuff in the mail.
I remember that with health and safety regulations, and you open the clip and put it in.
Yeah.
Right.
That's why they're often ring binders, so you could insert pages. Pretty weird. And of course, maps back in those days were big paper maps. And if I wanted to have a look at a zoning map to see what zone a particular area was, I'd have to go to the council and ask them to pull out their zoning maps for a particular area.
And you'd take notes, I suppose, these days. If you even had to do something like that, you'd use your phone to take a photo, or they'd email it to you. Wow, things have changed massively, haven't
Councils haven't, though.
No.
Just technology.
Oh, gosh, yeah. There you go. There's the first dig. How many? Dig number one. We'll see how many we can do without even realising.
So that's planning schemes anyway, and everything's based on that.
So mostly developers will be in touch with the council when they're applying for their DAs, etc. Can walk me through what the council will be involved in, or what they'll be looking for when somebody sends in their DA, their design approval for their first development.
Yeah, so although every council has its own rules and there's also state rules, it is fairly common. There's quite a bit of commonality as you go around the country in terms of how you deal with councils and how you lodge development applications. Probably the only thing you'll ever do where you don't need council permission is if you did a splitter, a 2-lot splitter, because you don't need to get a development permit for it. And in fact, you don't even need permission from council. It's already 2 lots. You just have to cut the title into 2 titles.
Those things are like hen's teeth, though, aren't they, these days? They're gold.
Yeah.
Get on the lookout for one of them.
But other than that, you're going to have to approach council to get a permission or development permit. And in some cases, it's a bit more rigorous than others. In some cases, the public has an opportunity to have a look at it. It's what we sometimes call public notification, or where it's up for advertising during the process. And so other people in the area can say, yep, great idea. No, hate it. Why I hate it.
But what determines whether it is up for public discussion or not?
Well, that'll be however the council operates in that particular zoning or in that particular area. So it'll be a council thing as to whether you need to go that process. But typically we need to get an application together. And so we pull our consultants together. Let's say something simple like a townhouse. So we'll get the site surveyed. Digital survey then goes to the architect. The architect will do up plans that he would expect would conform with the planning scheme. Then have a town planner. And it's great if the town planner and the architect know each other and work together. But
have beers on a Friday.
Have beers on a Friday, but it doesn't have to be that way. So the town planner will make sure that the design from the architect is conforming, or at least as close as possible. And then they'll get to a point, we'll get this is not about DA, so I won't get go into excruciating detail. Landscape architect will do a design, the civil engineer will have some input. Town planner will put the package together and lodge it at council. And that will be the development application lodged. And at that point, council have a big say in what happens. There can be times when you can have input with council prior to that actual lodgement, though.
And that means that's just a pre-lodgement meeting to make sure that you've ticked off boxes and everybody's tickety-boo and everything's running smoothly, which happens most of the time. I just also want to go back, Bob, because we're talking about the things that they cover or they look out for, or the restrictions, and you have to have that, because otherwise how would you feel if you have a beautiful home somewhere and somebody builds a skyscraper right next door and it's not zoned for that? We've got to have some level of control, which is great. But what about the relaxations that often happen that developers can be unaware of? How do we find out about those sort of things? Relaxations meaning where something is deemed to be that's the rule, and then like, well, we're not really abiding by that rule anymore.
Yeah, so relaxations can be interesting. When you look at a planning scheme, it's quite specific, although there can be some grey areas in there. But relaxations are really when council is prepared to not be really hard on a particular item. I'll give you an example. It was a few years ago now, with the local council I was working in, they were moving towards having a new planning scheme, and they only come out every so often. And
what inspires a new planning scheme, Bob? Is that because the town's growing, or
gets too many band-aids on it?
Oh, right.
So what'll happen? Let's say a planning scheme came out this year, and in the next coming years they'll still fiddle with it, and they'll change stuff, change a whole range of things, and that will be like amendments to the planning scheme. But it reaches a point where it no longer looks like the planning scheme it was when it was initiated, and that's why I say it's got so many band-aids on it. And so they'll need a new one. And every so often that might happen. It could be 10 years, it could be 5 or 6 years, depending, how progressive they are, how far they're moving forward. But back to these relaxations, I'll give you an example. The council was moving towards a new planning scheme in about the next 18 months. And that planning scheme was going to lift the density in a particular area. So it had to do with site coverage. So at the time, the gross floor area of the building couldn't be more than 60% of the site, the area of the site.
That's your GFA.
Yeah, gross floor area, GFA, yeah. And that was a rule, and they're pretty stringent on it. But because they were moving towards a higher density in the coming, 12, 18 months, they started to relax that. And so we started to see applications go through for 62, 65, 68, 70%, and even a little bit above 70%. And so they were relaxing it in anticipation of a change, rather than just hit the wall one day and say, well, today it's 60% and tomorrow it's going to be 70%. And I've seen it as well in an area that was very close to a big Westfield shopping centre, had a bus interchange, 150 metres away was a railway line, and they allowed some relaxations on car parking because they thought, well, if you've got everything there, you might not need the same level of car parking. And so we knew in that area they were relaxed on that, even though the planning scheme didn't specifically say that area is relaxed.
I suppose that what, in your experience, is the biggest relaxation? Is it usually car parking or is it usually GFA? What is it normally?
Well, you often don't get a lot of relaxations.
No.
It often goes the other way.
I've heard of both of those too in my time.
Tightening up.
Yeah.
Probably, setbacks occasionally.
Yeah.
I've had relaxations on rear boundary setbacks, for instance. The typical rule used to be your building had to be a minimum of 6 metres from the back boundary. The purpose of that was for privacy for the back neighbours. So they were 6 metres from their back fence, you were 6 metres from your back fence, you had 12 metres between you, and they considered that quite a distance for privacy, looking over the fence, looking at neighbours. I did some townhouses where I was able to bring it back to 4 metres, and the reason was that the neighbour over the back was a block of flats, and the wall that looked at my back boundary was a solid wall with no windows. And so privacy was never an issue. And so I thought, well, that's okay.
Did you point that out, or you?
Well, the planner pointed it out.
Yeah.
So we went for the relaxation, but you have to have a reason. And the reason was, well, privacy is not an issue because of that, and therefore, can we have the relaxation? They were fine with it.
I think that's really a good point you've brought up there, Bob, and it was the last mentoring student I just spoke to at 4:00. Hey, Reese, how you going, mate? But we were just talking about, looking at deals and stuff, and I just feel like he's so close, and I do believe it's knowing those little things about the reasoning why, you could get that relaxation because the block, and it's just looking for the different things that don't comply by the actual old square rules. There will always be, or there can always be, something that would trigger a change, and that was what happened there. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense. But moving on to common roadblocks, the frustrating roadblocks with council, what are some of the things that you, or do you want me to point them out? Because I've got the list that I've got here. But what do you find as probably the bigger roadblocks when it comes to dealing with council? What do you find frustrating?
Well, you can call it a roadblock, but it's an annoyance. And it's the amount of time they can take to process an application. And it varies from council to council. And look, there's reasons for it, and some are legitimate. Like, let's say there's a bit of a building boom on, council's going to get a lot of applications and they're going to be really busy. And so some councils just slow down. So what might have taken 3 months might now take 4 and 5 months because they're overworked. And, maybe they do a bit of overtime, but, it is a council. They're not going to work weekends, so they just slow down. Yet,
hang on, that was the second dig. That was the second underlying dig. There's two. Yeah, sorry.
But I've also seen councils take that on board and bring in like contractors. So they'll bring in private town planners, private architects and that, who might work maybe 2 days a week in council to help with the overload. And so that's a very responsible action from a council to, even though they're really busy and inundated, to process more quickly. It's probably rare for them to do that, but I've seen that. So time. We know that some states seem to be slower. Councils in some states seem to be slower.
Victoria is just notorious for slower councils. Is that blanketed Victoria or just pockets of?
Well, certain councils, yeah. I mean, it can be slow. You could make a generality and say, the process seems to be slower in Victoria than a lot of other places, but then some councils are quite slow and others aren't too bad. And you can say that about anywhere, but time's money in property development. So if you've settled on your land and now you're moving forward with a development application and it takes 9 months, well, that's a lot of interest. Whereas, if it went through in 3 or 4 months, that'd be great. So some councils in some areas do have some fast-tracked methods of, CDCs in New South Wales. Sometimes you can get a quick approval for your development.
How do they do that?
I'll bring in private enterprise usually.
Right.
The best way of speeding up council is to take it off them and give it to private enterprise.
Oh, that was number 3.
Well, they do it sometimes, Like if you look down the road from where we live, Brisbane City Council have done like heaps in there. Many years ago, they brought in certain methods for speeding up in certain circumstances, called SEALSMART, for speeding up development applications. And then later on, it was a big bugbear that when you finished your building, you had to wait a long time to get titles and settle. So they brought in another thing called SEALSMART. And what happens there is the council still maintain the control, but they allow certain jobs that they used to do to now be done by private enterprise, whether it's a private town planner, a certifier and CDCs, or at the other end, getting titles, surveyors. And so what was maybe take 6 weeks in council might take 1 or 2 weeks in private enterprise. And it costs a little bit more because you have to pay the private enterprise, but you're saving more in interest. So it's well and truly worth it. So that's my biggest bugbear is the time it can take.
And Bob, you brought up before neighbours' objections, and when they are allowed, that's another one that will slow things down. And I do know sometimes the objections don't really count. And I've learnt this from you, something you say, they go by the letter of the law. So somebody can complain, but if the law says you're allowed to do X, X, and X right here, and someone's just having a whinge, it's like, okay, tough. And they don't. That's probably the best way for somebody looking to face objections. If you can work your way through, go, yep, that's sorted. Yep, that's sorted. Yes, that's sorted. I'm good with that. That's covered. That's covered. This person is complaining about something that it's already covered off. Then they can't really stop it. But what is the likelihood of that slowing it down significantly?
Well, unfortunately, some councils do take way too much opinion of objectors who are frivolous. So my thinking is, and I think I'm right, is if somebody objects to, say, a development application, then they should have solid town planning reasons for objecting. I've seen objections because someone was proposing to have a green roof, like frivolous stuff. Or when I moved here 40 years ago, there weren't any townhouses in the street.
There wasn't internet either, mate. I bet you've got that in your house.
Yeah. So to me, like, that's frivolous.
Yeah.
And we know the expression NIMBYs, NIMBYS, not in my backyard. And there are some people who are just serial objectors, where they just object to everything in their area. So I think council should ignore people who don't have grounds for objection. And look, there are legitimate grounds for objection. And if there are, then they should be heard. And so but there's certain parts of the country, certain councils that take way too much opinion from objectors, and it gets quite political. Because within a council, you've got the permanent employees who are always there. And you've got, within there, you've got town planners and engineers and bigger councils, probably some architects and all sorts of people. They're always there no matter who gets elected. Then you've got the elected members, and they sort of break a council up into areas, and you have different, I'll call them aldermen, I'm not even sure if alder women, alder men, alder persons, whatever they are, who have an area. And they always have a bit of say as well in the applications that go through in their area.
You're talking about the councillors. So they've got in when their thing was, I'm going to not let people infill and you can preserve your local parks.
Well, because they're a political animal,
yes,
politics can really creep in. And then you can have a mayor. See, the mayor and all the alder people, they're politicians. They're not town planners. They're not permanent council employees. And so they can often look at it through a more political perspective. And
it's about them winning votes rather than what's best for, or what the rules actually state.
Well, I had an application in with council once to do some fairly new, small studio apartments in an area. And they actually conformed because I did it under a certain part of the town planning code that conformed. However, at the time there was a council election coming up, and how would you call it? The platform that the mayor and the other people who wanted to become the mayor were fighting it on was purely development, and it had become a real hot potato about older houses in an area getting knocked down and new apartments or townhouses going up. Become a real hot potato. And at one point, my architect got a call from the mayor. This is a big city, who used the F-bomb on him a few times, and how disgraceful it was that he was pushing this application to do this particular thing.
Did the mayor stay in, or did he lose his seat?
He ended up losing his seat.
Did you end up building the apartments?
I did, because they conformed. Which, if you love a story, can I tell you another quickie?
Love a
for
good
people
story.
that love stories?
Yes.
This same thing, what happened? I did another project almost the same, and it conformed with council. And in fact, when the mayor, going back to that mayor one, the permanent employees had actually approved it, and all it had to do was then go through and get the rubber stamp internally from the council, and that's when the mayor intercepted it and took it off his own employees to reverse it. But I had another similar. It didn't work. I had another similar one at one time, and the head town planner that was of that section that was doing my application, halfway through it, left and moved. And that happens sometimes, where council employees leave and go into private enterprise. So he left his job at the council and went and joined quite a large company that had town planning and engineering, like a big company.
Private sector?
Yeah, big private sector. And he phoned me like just after he left. He said, "Oh, look, so-and-so's taken over the file at the council. I've actually left. I'm over here." And I was having a little bit of trouble with council at the time. And I said, "How would you like to?" I said, "I've got your first job for you," because he'd only moved there like 1 or 2 days. I said, "How would you like to represent me on the other side of the fence now against council?" He said, "Oh, that'll be my first job in private enterprise." He said, "I'm up for it," because he had everything. He knew everything about it, and he had the jump. And we nailed him.
You got it through. That was actually something I was going to talk about, Bob, was staff turnover mid transaction like that. Does that generally tend to work in the developer's favour, because you've got someone else managing the process and then it changes? Do they sort of tend to go, "Oh yeah, we'll just get that through," or how does that work?
Well, it's messy. I mean, I don't think I've had it. At least if I did, I didn't know if I've had somebody leave. But I had an application held up once where the person that was looking after the file and processing it through council went on maternity leave, and was checking like, how's it going, and nobody told me. But eventually I got my planner onto it, and he said, oh, she's on maternity leave. And I said, well, that's great, but who's got the file? And the file hadn't gone. The file was still on her desk. And so we eventually, and probably other people's files, I don't know, we eventually got it moved on to somebody else, but there was a delay. That's pretty crazy stuff.
Do you know what? That really answers a little loop in my head, because last Friday we were settling on a site, a large one, and the titles had only come through the Friday before. Was it the Friday or the Thursday before? So we had just a short time to settle, but because of that, the land tax, the land tax hadn't been calculated, and you have to wait for that to go through before you can actually settle, because there's money to exchange hands, etc. And so this is for people listening. Bob and I were having a conversation. He goes, "Do you know what's happened?" He goes, our lawyer had rung up. Where do you ring?
Stamp duties or the land tax.
Yeah, land tax.
State government land tax.
So our lawyer had rung the state government land tax department, whoever they are, and she said she'd had it fast tracked. And your comment was, let me guess, I know what's happened, because it only had a week to happen. You said, it's sitting on someone's desk and she's gone on maternity leave. So that's why you said it.
Yep.
Just to finish that story, we did get it fast tracked. So we actually got that fast tracked, and it came through just in the nick of time, and we managed to settle in a short amount of time, which we wouldn't recommend. But it's always that little bit of stress because you've paid that deposit, and a bit of a problem when the other side says they're not going to give us an extension, and there's always that little stressy moment. But anyway, that was dealing with sort of similar to a council by ringing, asking them to fast track it. They did. But yes, now I understand why you said that. So Bob, let's talk about negotiation tactics. What do you believe is the best way to negotiate with council? Because, oh my goodness, I know you have had to negotiate with some councils, and I know why you have such a resistance to them, because you've had some pretty bad things happen from council. Even if anyone watching on YouTube now has facial expression, he's just like, oh yeah. But anyway, what do you believe is the best way to get something through and to negotiate with them and work with them to get them on side?
Well, let's take it a step back. There's some councils that are more pro-development than others, and there's some that are really quite anti-development in some places, in some states. And
they're different. They're pockets we're talking, aren't we?
Yeah. It's because politically it's been taken over by people that are anti-development or socialist in their views, and have become, that way. And best thing, don't develop in those areas. So it's a matter of like really talking to private town planners and architects, and they'll have a pretty good idea who they are. So first, don't go there.
I know that about you. I know of places where there's something stacked up. You're like, nah, not going there. Just not worth the hassle with the council.
And that can change in time as, elected members get tossed out and business collapses in an area, and, a whole heap of things happen. It's usually sort of a downward spiral for that council, but it takes, a while to get rid of them. So first of all, go to a pro-development, or at least a neutral council. Use a really good town planner who's familiar with the council, knows people in there. But beyond that, see if you can conform as much as possible with the planning scheme, because you're going to have less pushback from council. Or if there's things that you can't conform to, then know that you've got a pretty good chance of talking them around. And so that's back to a good experienced town planner, because that town planner might know, look, there's certain things here. I think we've got a good case. Let's say our landscaping is supposed to be 30% of the site cover, and we're on 28. And it's going to be a real annoyance to get that last 2%, because we've got to take a bit of the building away and whatever else. And they might say, look, they're not too bad at that, but we can come up with a good argument as to why that 2% isn't a big issue, and come up with other good things about the development to compensate. So that's back to the town planner. But like, don't try and change it
Yeah,
in a
everything.
big way.
Yeah.
If it's 2-story area, don't go for 3 stories and that sort of thing. So try and conform as much as possible. With council, just be professional, and like this could come out of something like a pre-lodgement meeting where you're having meetings with council before you actually lodge. But don't be confrontationalist. By the same token, if you've got a good argument for something, you want a town planner who's just not going to capitulate and roll over, because there's different types of town planners. You could have you want a town planner who's prepared to go in and bat for you if that town planner thinks you're right or the council shouldn't be doing something, and that's a difference. I've seen because council will some council officers will try and bully a bit and push for stuff that isn't necessarily in black and white to try and get their way. I think it's something really stupid, and this story. We had a couple who bought a site to do a development on, and they wanted to do a townhouse development, and the council officer took it upon herself to say to them, we want a higher density in that area. We don't just want townhouses, we want apartments. And it didn't really stack up. And then she said, what you need to do is buy the neighbour's property so you've got a bigger property. Then you can go up another 2 levels. And then, we'll support that application.
The neighbour's property wasn't even for sale.
Well, it wasn't for sale, and they never had the money to buy it, and they didn't want to do a bigger apartment block. And that took quite a lot of push from the consultants, and even going, and it wasn't an easy job going around it or over it, to go higher up the line, because it didn't want to go all the way to VCAT. Oh, there you go. I just said what state it's in, of course. And then get a knockback, and then have to go to the court, probably 6 months later down the track, to fight something that was ridiculous.
It is so ridiculous. So what is the best way to deal with that? Just try and build that instant rapport as soon as you can, have great relationships. But what about when you do get that one person who needs to flex their muscles because at home they have no say in their life and they're angry and they drive a bomb car and they're, they've got everything in their life's bad. So the one thing they can control is, I want this.
Yeah, well, hopefully they're working within the planning scheme themselves.
Can you go above their head, Bob?
Oh, yeah. So once you've lodged a development application, a particular town planner within there, we'll call that the assessment manager, will be nominated, and they'll run that file, they'll run that project. And there's other assessment managers in the council as well, and they'll sort of overview it, and they'll distribute it to different people who have input, civil engineers and different people within the council that have input into that application. They'll be like the coordinator of that. And providing they're sticking reasonably well with the planning scheme and you've stuck reasonably well with the planning scheme, it generally should go okay. I'm sure it'll take longer than you want, because it always does. And it's really up to your town planner then to deal with the council, but you can maintain a right as the landowner. And so there'll be an applicant who lodges it. Technically, look, it's often the town planner, but it could be you, the landowner developer, who's the applicant via the town planner. And so, as much as possible, look, all things being reasonable, they should be reasonable and you should be reasonable. But here's another story. I'm going back quite a while, probably going back like 25 years. I had an application in for a 20 townhouse project at a council, and there was a storm. It wasn't so much a stormwater issue, but we had to prove to council that we could basically offload the stormwater into an existing stormwater main. And I had a hydraulic engineer who did the calcs, but I was still getting a lot of pushback from council. And I met somebody during the process who knew the particular council officer, the engineer, who was handling that. And he said, he is a shocker. He just hates developers. And he was a local as well. And this guy knew him personally. He'd had a couple of beers with him. I said, well, that can happen. And he said he'll do everything to try and stymie you or slow you down. And he gave me a couple of tips. But I said, why is that? He said, well, think about it. He's stuck in a job that he probably doesn't like for some reason, and he's getting paid what he considers not enough money. But he's not brave enough to go into private enterprise as an engineer and make more money and take more responsibility. And he sees developers and thinks they must make a fortune. And, the old developer thing, drive a black car, have a hot girlfriend, the old developer thing, this is back in the days when most developers were men, And he said he just hates it, and that's what he'll do. And he did. I didn't have a black car or a hot girlfriend, but he still slowed me down a bit.
That's so bad, isn't it? And you mentioned that was 25 years ago, but that still goes on now because you've experienced it in the last few years. You've had your fair share of just pushback from council. So we do know this. It's not a thing that's gone. It's something that does happen. So really building relationships is important, and it's important that your town planner has a good relationship. And I remember we interviewed Dan King, a year or so ago, and that's what he said. He once had the wrong town planner who didn't get on with council, and it stalled him moving forward, and he almost lost that deal. So it's really important that you do have someone who does have a relationship and does know how to communicate with people, and you know those people. You can tell that they interact well.
Yeah, I should say, I know during this podcast I'm having a shot here and there at councils, but we've had some great experiences by and large with councils.
Oh my gosh, haven't we? We recently had one up the road where they just quickly pushed something through on one of the industrial blocks that we've got going on, and even with the DA for the duplex, 2 weeks.
Yeah,
that was
11 working days for a DA for a duplex. So
we do have good experiences.
I just wanted to balance it.
Yeah.
But a lot of my interesting stories, and what makes them interesting is they're sort of stories about naughty councils.
Yes.
Or and there's some I can't even talk about.
Bob, I think we should just go final thoughts. What is your final piece of advice? I want to wrap up with, I'll just go through my bullet points. Council delays can be normal, so you really need to plan for them. That's the first thing. Use pre-lodgement meetings when you can, just to find out if you've got everything running how it should be. Hire a town planner who knows the council, knows all the bylaws, knows what they need to get done and what they need to present. Stay collaborative and responsive, and have good communication with your council, not combative. Build in those time frames in your feasibility in case something does happen and there are delays. And lastly, when in doubt, ask questions, ask them early and ask them often. What would you add to that as takeaways for this podcast when working with council?
Yeah, look, they're all good ones. There's one I'll throw in that has nothing to do with working for a council, but if you can get a long settlement on a site, even if you pay a little bit more for it, but it's the holding costs that hurt, and it's one of the things that you have little control over. I'm talking about the length of time it takes to get a development permit, which is really only part of your dealings with council, but a big piece. And when interest rates are up a bit and councils are really slow, it's a significant number in your feasibility. As you just said, you're going to have to include that in your feasibility, take it into account. But also look for opportunities of where you could get faster development permits, councils that are more proactive, or certain systems like CDCs or SEALSMART, or find out from town planners, is there something that's quicker? And there might even be an alternative development that you could do on the same land that's less intensive, but it's a lot quicker and proportionally might still make a good profit.
Yeah, that's a great tip, Bob. So for those of you listening to this week's podcast, wherever you are, in your car, to the two Kyles who usually text me after most episodes, how you going, guys? Just to everyone who listens, I hope you found something really useful in that. As I said, please share it with somebody who you think might be interested in what we have to say, and we would love to have a review from you. If you'd like to win the book, reach out, send us an email, admin@propertymastermind.com.au. We've got another free lunchtime session coming up next week. Bob, what's that on?
I've forgotten already.
But yeah, I was just thinking, I didn't even know if you knew.
Well, I'm also I'm preparing a lot of things at the same time because we've got the lunchtime seminar coming up. It's not all that far away to our 3-day workshop, and so I'm putting some new material into that at the same time. And I'm also
getting ready for
I'm busy on
the free
PowerPoints.
masterclass.
Well, I'm also
Saturday one.
redoing some of our specialist training for our mentoring program. So because I'm running like 3 different programs and 3 lots of PowerPoints and everything at the same time and updating stuff.
Look at you go.
I actually can't answer that question.
You go. Okay. Well, we do have a free lunchtime training coming up. There'll be a link below with what that is about. We do have our free masterclass coming up in August. That's a 3.5-hour masterclass. The lunchtime one's just a 45-minute chunk bite. And last time, what were we on last time? Was that finance? No,
we did the team last time.
Last time we went through the team. So I'm not sure what this one is, but then we've, like Bob said, we've got our 3-day workshop in September, which is fabulous. So if you want to know more about that, you can book into my diary and have a chat. You can head over to our website, propertymastermind.com.au. But anyway, we would love to see you. We'd love to help you on your journey. So go forth and conquer, and happy developing. Bye for now.
Bye.